this. We tend to think that dictatorship is a bad thing. We tend to think that participation, involvement, voice is a particularly good thing. But clearly, dictatorship is our default leadership style. I think there are three broad reasons. The first one being that leaders think they know more than they do. It's human nature. Leaders are over-optimistic about their own abilities and their level of knowledge, and tend to underestimate the amount of knowledge that is needed within any particular situation. The second reason, I think, is that consultation takes time. It's actually easier to make a decision to implement that than it is to go out and ask opinions and then try to gather those opinions to make a decision. But I think the third point that I've got up on the slide is the core of much of the problem in organisations. That voice yields power and control, and a lot of leaders are very reluctant to do that. We see it in the cartoon at the bottom there, where Dilbert's pointy-haired boss decides to try participation very briefly, momentarily likes it when everyone seems to be involved in his decision-making process, but in the end decides that participation is not his thing. I came across this quote when I was visiting the UK on business a couple of weeks ago. It's a quote from the diary of Samuel Pepys. I've been told from a historian that the correct way of pronouncing that is Pepys. Samuel Pepys was essentially the head bureaucrat for the British Navy, and he wrote a diary over a period of 10 years that has become quite well known within English history. And the reason it's well known is that it happened at a fairly tumultuous time in England. They just had the Great Plague, the Great Fire of London. They were engaged in a fairly large naval war with the Dutch at this point. And I think this quote sums up much of the fear and concern and uncertainty that leaders have with giving other people some say in decision making. As I said, he was the head of the Admiralty. Britain was at war. You could imagine him wanting to push through some decisions fairly quickly, but he's having to deal with the House of Commons, which is a voice mechanism for people within a country. And he writes, "The House of Commons is a beast not to be understood, it being impossible to know beforehand the success of almost any small plain thing. There being so many to think and speak to any business, and they have so uncertain minds, interests and passions." And I can imagine a lot of leaders in your organisations having the same kind of fear about, if I throw this issue open to my employees, what am I going to get back? Am I going to get the answer that I want? This slide, I won't go through it in great detail, but basically just covers a range of voice mechanisms. It does highlight two broad streams of research and discussion in the literature regarding voice. Over on the left-hand side, what I've labelled proactive voice mechanisms tends to come from a background of human resource management, organisational psychology, organisational behaviour. And much of the focus there is about the work practices within an organisation that contribute to productivity and performance. And there is an assumption behind many of those voice practices that if management and staff work together, there is a best way forward that's going to satisfy everyone else's needs. On the right-hand side, what I've labelled restorative voice tends to come from an industrial relations background. And much of the mechanisms that exist there are often dealing with problems, and problems often of a personal or interpersonal nature. I won't go through all of them in great detail, but just to give you a couple of examples of how these can be implemented and what we've seen as being quite effective. MBWA. What's MBWA? Management by walking around. Well done. I think it stems back to Tom Peters, who some of you may not know anymore. He's sort of a past guru of management, maybe one of the first gurus of management with his book In Search of Excellence. Management by wandering around is one of the most effective and simple mechanisms for voice, where basically the principle is that the managers, the leaders, get out there and they start mixing with the front line in organisations. And that provides an extremely effective mechanism for voice in organisations. We see over and over again in the survey work that we do that face-to-face contact with leaders is so much more powerful than any other form of communication. And when the manager's out